Good morning. If we could take our seats, please. A couple more ground that way. For those who weren't here last week, I'm going to introduce Dr. Cargill. He is a force in the world of biblical studies, classics, archaeology. He has authored books, television programs on National Geographic, history, and discovery. His vision is that the study of ancient civilizations associated with the lands of the Bible, with a mutual respect for each other's histories, heritages, and aspirations, will lead to a more prosperous and peaceful future. Last week we studied the 8 gates, and today we're going to study the 8 dates that are historically significant to Jerusalem. After this week, if you want to see more of Dr. Cargill, pick up one of these on his line and you will see programs of, he founded the biblical archaeology. He founded the biblical archaeology courses, and they're online and you can take advantage of them. So, Dr. Cargill.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thank you.
These will be up front.
I don't think you're turned on. Yep. Here. Thank you so much for having me back. It's good to be back again. Today we're going to talk about dating in Jerusalem, which is how I met my wife. No, it's a joke. What we did last week is I took you through the 8 gates of Jerusalem, and by showing you the 8 gates, we was able to tell you some of the history of Jerusalem. This is a different approach. What we're going to do is a chronological approach. I want to take you through some of the history of Jerusalem by simply walking you through some of the key moments in the history of Jerusalem. So we're going to start back through the early Canaanite periods of the Bronze Age, and then I will go quickly as I can, but without going too fast. And we'll try to get some of the key dates. And I'll try to keep you, there's a timeline that I'll keep putting up there to show you kind of the long history of Jerusalem. So what we'll do is we'll start, this is the area that we're talking about here, so Egypt over here. This is Gaza here, which has been in the news a lot lately, Israel and the West Bank, and then of course the Golan, Lebanon, moving on up, and then Jordan over here to the east. And this is the timeline that I'm talking to you about. A lot of people have lived in this area, and I've tried to put them Islamic in green, Christian or Roman in red, Jewish or Israelite in blue, and then light blue, dark blue, depending on whether they had self-autonomous rule or whether they were occupied by another entity. But you can see going all the way back up to the Canaanites, the original peoples up in Canaan, up in this land that was called, by the way, it was called Palestine all the way back in the 5th century BC. Herodotus, the famous Greek historian, referred to it as Palestine. In fact, he lays out a definition in his histories. He says all the lands from, and then he describes Lebanon and Syria, down to Egypt are called Palestine. So as early as the 5th century BC, the Greeks were calling all of this land Palestine, which was its name all the way down through, and even up till today, but down through the formation of the modern state of Israel. So it's been called Palestine since well before any Arabs even got there. It's just that's been its old name. It's also been called Israel and Judah and Canaan and the Holy Land. And so when you hear scholars use all these different names interchangeably, we're usually referring to different historical periods or different, but this is what we're talking about in the history of occupation. It's been the Canaanites, and the big occupying powers there were the Hittites to the north and the Egyptians to the south. And then the Assyrians would come in when it was Israel and Judah. Then of course the Babylonians came in and destroyed the temple. Then when they came back to rebuild the second temple, it was the Persians who were in control. And then the Greeks came in, you've all seen 300. The Greeks came in and defeated the Persians, and these were the Ptolemies and the Seleucids. This is when Samaria and Judah were growing. Then the Hasmoneans had their famous revolt. This is where we get Hanukkah from. So they overthrow the Greeks, and then the Romans came in and took over. And the Romans eventually destroyed the second temple and eventually banned Jews from the city in 135 under the Emperor Hadrian. and then turned it into a Roman city, and then into a Byzantine Christian city. So then Jerusalem would become a Christian city. And then when we get into the 7th century, the Arabs come in and conquer the region and turn it into an Islamic city. Except for a period of the Crusaders coming back trying to take it for a year, it remained largely an Islamic city until the end of World War I and the British Mandate, and then the modern state of Israel formed in 1947. So I'm going to try to do that in 45 minutes with just some key shots. So here we go. The first key thing that I want you to know about is the Pharaoh Merneptah. So this is the Egyptian pharaoh from the 19th dynasty. This is the 13th century BCE. He was the 13th son of Ramses II. He's responsible for the earliest reference to Israel that we have. Specifically, and this is important, it's a reference in this stela, the Merneptah stela. Down there you can see where people have been touching it and rubbing it, basically dark there. It's outside of the Bible. So you do have references to Israel from the 13th century, from the Bronze Age, outside of the Bible. And it's a victory stele. I don't know if you know this, but leaders, especially kings, they like to brag about the things that they do. Sometimes they're not truthful about it, but they like to brag about the things that they do.
I wonder where we get that.
Yeah, well, it's been around. It wasn't invented recently. It's been going around for a long, long time, right? And so here you have, in 1208, he goes on his military campaign, and then he brags about everybody he defeated. And you'll recognize some of these names. He says, the princes are prostrate, not one of the 9 bows lifts its head. That's a reference to the different armies there. Tehunu is vanquished, Kati is at peace, Canaan is captive with all woe. Who are the people in Canaan? Ashkelon is conquered. Maybe some of you have been to Ashkelon over on the coast, just north of Gaza. Gezer, which is right in the middle of Canaan, seized. Yanoam is made non-existent. Israel is wasted, its seed is no more. So here you actually have a reference to Israel from an Egyptian pharaoh from the 13th century BC. Now, what's interesting about this reference is it doesn't, in the hieroglyphs, the reference that it uses to Israel is not that of a city, but as that of a foreign people. So in the 13th century BC, Israel they hadn't come out of the highlands yet, they hadn't settled Jerusalem yet, they hadn't become a city like Gezer, like Ashkelon. They were still settling into and this of course corresponds to what we know from the Bible is the period of the Judges. So they hadn't become a dominant people yet, but they were still a people there named Israel that were, I always use the term tribing up. They were still expanding as tribes, they were still figuring out who they were, but they didn't have a king yet, they didn't have a city yet. But they were a people in existence in Canaan, in Palestine, in this region, and Merneptah claims to have wiped them out. Now, this is obviously a false claim, right? He didn't destroy it, but he may have beaten them in battle. What we do know is he knew of this people named Israel in the 13th century in Canaan. One of the reasons it becomes a big deal is because there are many people who read the story of the Exodus, and they're trying to always date the Exodus. Now, this is a big, in Hebrew we say balagan. It's a big, when you go behind your TV and there's that big jumble of wires, and it takes forever to undo it. That's a balagan, right? It's a big mess of how to date the Exodus if, in fact, there was a historical Exodus. And the problem is the Bible gives 2 different dates internally as to when the Exodus would have taken place. And Merneptah describes this as taking place, if he's describing it, in this 13th century down here. But the Bible says that it was taking place, that the Israelites went back in the 12th dynasty, in the 19th century, and then gives some internal dates of when it was taking place, and it doesn't exactly line up. So I'm just going to leave that at that. I just want to show you that the Merneptah stela, anytime you hear about it, it's usually going to be in an argument or in a debate about the Exodus. And then that's when you want to just scroll, because different people use it for different things with the Exodus. Yes.
So was there an agreed upon calendar at this time?
Yeah, there was.
Okay,
we know what the dates are.
Okay.
There's one guy out there who tries to redate the entire history of all known dates so that he can make it fit, and that's not usually a good idea. But I just wanted to point out that we have a reference to Israel in Canaan, the people who would become the Israelites, who would become the Jews in Canaan in the 13th century. Now we'll move down for this date here, we'll move down to once they've become a dynasty, once they've become a kingdom. So you have Israel as a united kingdom under David and Solomon, and then Rehoboam comes in and says the things that he says, and they split into two kingdoms, Israel in the north, 10 tribes, Judah in the south. So here you can see it here. And we have a discovery that was made in 1991, a relatively recent discovery. This is called the Tel Dan inscription. It was discovered in Tel Dan, up in the north. And it's interesting because it makes a reference. This is an Aramean king. This is a foreign king, again, referencing how he defeated. I always say there's lots of evidence about Israel and Judah. It's not all flattering, right? But there's a lot of evidence. But you can see over here, and again, they like to highlight on the artifact references to David, so they went in there and made it white, and it's permanently defaced now. If you go to the Israel Museum, you can see this. But he's going in and he's bragging about, I, Hadad, went before me, my king and I slew riots 2,000 horsemen, the king of Israel and the house of David, the Beit David. So what you have in the 9th or 8th century BCE is a foreign king in Aramaic, this is an Aramaic inscription, making reference to the king of Israel and to the Beit David, the house of Israel. The house here meaning dynasty. So, does this prove that David existed? Maybe. What we do have is evidence that there was a people that referred to themselves as the sons of David, as the children of David. And this, of course, is in parallel with Israel. So the house of David is Judah. And it's evidence of Israel being separated from Judah. And this is from the 8th century BC. So this is another piece of concrete. Of course, when this was first discovered, everybody thought it was a fake. And they went back the next year and they found this half of it. And they went, okay, it's not a fake. I mean, they actually found it in the ground. This is another piece of evidence. This is called the Black Obelisk of Shalmaneser III. It's a big mouthful. But this is an Assyrian king, Shalmaneser III, who is the big ruler. Assyria is the dominant kingdom. And they have taken Israel, and they have taken Judah for that extent. But Israel is a vassal. So the big kingdom is Assyria, and Israel basically has to pay tribute to to Assyria, so that Assyria doesn't come and just destroy Israel. Okay? So this is when, if you read in 1 Kings 15, when the king of Israel and the king of Judah are at war with each other, and Jehu, the king of Israel, in order to fight against Judah, becomes a vassal to the king of Israel. So we read about this in 1 Kings, but is there any evidence of it? Okay? So if we read, when we discovered this black obelisk, which is in the British Museum in London, you can see these panels. So they put these panels like comic books, and you can just go down the panels, and then you can see the cuneiform there up on the top, the little wedges. Looks like chicken scratch up here. But what you have is King Jehu of Israel on his knees, bowing down. Literally, if you watch Game of Thrones, he's bending the knee, right, to the king, to Shalmaneser of Assyria. And it's him receiving tribute from Jehu, son of Israel. And the inscription reads, "The tribute of Jehu, son of Omri, I received from him silver, gold, a golden bowl, a golden vase, with a pointed bottom, golden tumblers, golden buckets, tin, a staff for a king, and spears." So again, evidence of ancient Israel in Canaan. Now, it's not flattering evidence, right? This isn't kind of, but it is evidence, archaeological evidence outside of the Bible of ancient Israel in Canaan. So now we have the story of, they've been around for a while. Israel's been destroyed, was ultimately destroyed by the Assyrians in 721. Judah continues to live on, but the Babylonians come along in 586 and destroy Jerusalem, and they destroy the temple, and they exile the people into Babylon. Now, do we have any evidence of this? Some people have challenged this. And the answer is yes, we do. We have some evidence of this. So behind the Ishtar Gate in Babylon, a discovery was made in the southern palace. And here we have what we call the ration tablets of Jehoiakim. If you'll remember, when the Babylonians first came in to besiege Jerusalem, Jehoiakim the king said, "Spare my city, and I will surrender to you. I will go into exile, but spare my city." So Jehoiakim surrendered, went into exile with the king, and they set up Zedekiah. They set up a puppet king in Jerusalem. And then Zedekiah basically, you have to use your imagination. He's a king he's a leader that comes to authority with the help of a foreign government, but he basically has to do whatever the foreign government tells him to do. Okay, so this is Zedekiah. But then finally he decides, I don't want to just do what the Assyrian king tells me, or the Babylonian king tells me to do. I want to be a real leader. And he decides to rebel against Babylon, and Babylon says, you're not allowed to do that. So Babylon comes in and destroys Jerusalem, but not before taking Zedekiah's children, the heirs to the throne of David, and killing them all in front of Zedekiah, and then gouging out his eyes. So the last thing he sees is his son's dying, and then they take Zedekiah away. But Jehoiakim, who had originally surrendered the city, was allowed to live in Babylon and was given an allowance and was allowed to live because he submitted to Babylon. So what we found in Babylon was this inscription, and it says, and what it is it's a ration tablet. The Babylonians would give rations to the people, the nobles that they conquered. 3.5 selah for 7 Greeks, a half selah for Nabu-Atir, the carpenter, and then you have this. 10 selah to Yaku'ukinu, this is Jehoiakim, the son of the king of Yahudu, of Judah. And 2.5 selah for the 5 sons of the king of Yahudu, of Judah. And this corresponds to 2 Kings 25:27. In the 37th year of the exile of King Jehoiakim of Judah, in the 12th month of the 27th day of the month, King Merodach of Babylon, in the year that he began to reign, released King Jehoiakim of Judah from prison. And for his allowance, a regular allowance was given him by the king, a portion every day as long as he lived. And here you've got the actual ration tablet of what he gave him. So again, you've got evidence of that verse. Again, it's not flattering. It's not flattering at all. But it's evidence that these kings existed, that they were there, and that at least this verse in 2 Kings 25 appears to be historical. Because their enemies, the Babylonians, are corroborating this claim made in 2 Kings 25. So that's a key date, the destruction of the temple in 587 and the evidence of this survival. We'll skip down here to the Hasmoneans. This is after the Persians, after the Persians have rebuilt the temple. The Greeks come in and destroy the Persians. The Greeks are pretty hostile towards the Jews there. They actually replaced the high priest in Jerusalem. And so they're basically meddling with the high priesthood in Jerusalem, which really upsets a lot of the Jewish peoples there in Israel. And so they decide to rebel. This is Judah Maccabee. So this is the Great Rebellion. They weren't supposed to win it, but they were able to go in and defeat the Seleucid army, the Greek army. And they went into the temple, and they don't run up a flag like we do. They light the menorah. But there was only enough oil to light the menorah for one night, but miraculously, it burned for 8 nights. And this is the story of course, Hanukkah. It was this revolt, the Maccabean revolt, that led to the Hasmonean dynasty. And this would be Jews in antiquity having self-government. This is autonomous control. So they've gotten rid of the Greeks, they've gotten rid of the Persians, and they're actually controlling themselves for about a century, from about 150 BC to about 63 BC when the Romans showed up. And they minted coins, and here's one of the Hasmonean rulers, John Hyrcanus. And you can say, you see that it's Yehohanan Kohen Gadol Haber Yehudim, right? Haber Yehudim. Jonathan, the high priest, the council of the Jews. So he's actually printing a coin in Hebrew as the Hebrew ruler. And his son, Alexander Jannaeus, knowing that he wants to be a good king to his subjects, but also he wants to look like a good king to those Greek kings around him, he puts a king that says Basileus Alexandru, of King Alexander in Greek, but he also puts Yehonatan Hamelech, Jonathan the king. So these Hasmonean kings were real. They minted coins, and this was from about 150 BC to 63 CE when Pompey the Great for the Romans showed up and annexed Jerusalem. By the way, this is the last time that the Jews would have self-authority, that they would rule their own land until the formation of the modern state of Israel. Because after this, when the Romans showed up, they would annex Jerusalem, and then after the Great Revolt, they would destroy the temple, and then after the second revolt, the Bar Kokhba revolt, the Emperor Hadrian would banish them from the city. And so this is when the people who have been there for 1,000 years now become a diaspora religion. They're no longer allowed to go back into Jerusalem, except for one day a year to mourn the loss of their city. The Romans were the ultimate trolls. They would troll the Jewish people. They'd say, you can come back in and mourn the loss of the city, mourn the fact that we took your city from you. That was the 9th of Av, which is a holiday that's still celebrated, a memorial that's still celebrated today. The Romans come in.
Yeah, what is that called?
The 9th of Av. The Av is one of the Jewish months. The 9th of Av just so happens to be, according to tradition, the day of the month that both the first temple and the second temple were destroyed. The tradition is that they were both destroyed in the same month, or the same day. Herod the Great minted coins. He was a real person. He worked for the Romans. So again, you have a case where a foreign government went and got a person to set up as a puppet king. This is Herod. So he came to power with the help of a foreign government, and he was part Jewish. He was actually an Idumean, the descendants of the Edomites. And he became a king on behalf of the Romans, but he was the king of the Jews. He minted coins. What do you notice about Herod the Great's coins here? Different from most coins that we see both today and in antiquity. No face on the coin. Herod was smart enough to know that he couldn't put his face on a coin because no graven images. So this is one of the, I always ask my students, was Herod the Great a good king or a bad king? And the answer, of course, is yes. Because he worked for the Romans, and he was terribly paranoid, and he liked to build buildings and put his name. He was just, it was all about him. He was a dictator. He was, right? But he was also really good for the economy. And it was all about getting people jobs, and it was all about if you made him happy, then everyone else was going to be happy. And I'm talking about Herod the Great. And this was the world that they lived in. This was if you made him happy, he would make sure that the money went out to you. But he came to power with the help of a foreign government. And he was incredibly paranoid, and he always thought there was going to be a coup, and he killed his own sons when he thought that they were going to try to overthrow him. So he killed his own wife when she thought that he was conspiring, and then he missed her. He killed his own wife, and then Mariamne, and then he missed her terribly We just did a documentary where we showed this scene where the tradition later was that he wouldn't have her buried. He had her preserved in honey, and so that way he could go in and visit her. This was the rabbinic traditions about Herod the Great. Creepy guy. He was real. When he died, they let his sons try to take over, but his sons were inept, and so they allowed Roman governors to come in, which didn't know the Jewish customs. So this is why I say, at least Herod knew the Jewish customs. One of those Jewish governors was named Pontius Pilate. Real person. We have coins that Pontius Pilate minted under the Emperor Tiberius. He was highly ineffective. One of the reasons he was considered to be ineffective was he kept trying to put the hammer down on the Jews, and the Jews would just say, "You want to kill us? Kill us." Josephus says they would just bare their necks and say, "Kill us." And there would be a lot of them doing it, and he would be like, all right, I can't just slaughter all the people. And then one time he did that, and then they tattled on him back to Rome, and he got recalled back to Rome. So this is a guy who didn't care about killing people, didn't care if they were guilty or innocent. He just wanted to prove that he was a strong man. He was from the equestrian class, and so when you're trying to move up in the administration, when you're starting out, moving from a general, moving from up, and they would put you in Jerusalem. They'd put you way out there in the east and say, "Go cut your teeth out there and see if you can make it. And if you're no good, you're done. And if you can make it there, then we'll see if we can graduate you up." We also know that Herod the Great, that Pilate was real. And again, here you can see it, one of Pilate's coins, because of the Pilate stone. So in Caesarea Maritima, where Herod the Great's former palace was, Pilate moved into his palace. And then he wanted to build, Pilate did, an Augusteum, a temple to Augustus. Remember, Augustus was deified, so he wanted to build a temple to Augustus out there on the coast. And so he built this dedicatory plaque, this inscription to him. And if I bring it in here close, you can actually see some of the Latin letters. By the way, you can take Latin at the University of Iowa. I'm always recruiting. But here you can see Pontius Pilatus, and again, these are the ones that are broken off, but you can see it here. Pilatus, Prefect Judaeae. You see it there? So this is the Pilate inscription of the Pilate stone, and what it says is that to the divine Augustus Tiberium Pontius Pilate, Prefect of Judea, has dedicated this thing. This stone was actually found face down in reuse as a step. So the archaeologists were found, okay, we took a picture of this staircase, and they flipped the stone over, and they found this. And I would love to have been that graduate student doing that work. Being like, oh, I'm going to write a paper.
A+.
Right? Yeah, exactly. The director of the dig's like, come with me. I got a project for you for the next 10 years. So this is Pontius Pilate was a real person. Does this prove that he crucified Jesus? No, but it proves that he was a real person in the place where the Gospels say that he was. We also know that the Romans came in and destroyed the temple in 70 CE. That's what happened to the second temple. The Romans find you have these predictions of Jesus saying, I'm going to destroy this temple is going to be destroyed. Well, the Romans came and did that in 70 CE because the Jews got so upset with the Roman occupation of their city, this is their capital, their ancient capital. They got so upset with being occupied that they rebelled, they revolted. And the Romans just said, we're the Romans, you don't revolt against the greatest army on earth. And so they went in and absolutely flattened Jerusalem. And then they destroyed the temple. And then they went back to Rome and they established the Arch of Titus. So the Arch of Titus is actually sitting, has anybody been to the Roman Forum in Rome? You can see right next to the Colosseum, there's the Arch of Titus. And if you look on the inside here, again, you'll see these comic book panels, and this is one of them here. And if you drill down and look closely at it, you can actually see what is depicted is the Romans carrying off the booty from the temple. And you can see some of the key things. You can see the menorah coming out of the temple. You can actually see the trumpets, the silver trumpets that are described. And you can see there's a table of the bread of presence. What don't you see in there? The ark. This is the old mystery. This is the other book I'm working on right now. What happened to the Ark of the Covenant? It's already gone. The Ark of the Covenant's gone by the time the Romans show up. Or else they would have put it prominently into this picture. So the Ark's already gone. So did the Babylonians take it? What happened to it? But it's already gone. It's not shown in this picture. Then, I told you the Romans were master trollers, right? Then they mint coins. So after they destroy the Jews in Jerusalem, after they destroy the temple, they minted coins where they depicted the Jewish people as a woman kneeling down in defeat up against a tree. And it says, Judea capta. Judah has been captured. And then they minted these coins, and then they made the people in the area use them. So that every day they'd have to go out and they'd see when they're buying their bread or they're buying their fish. This is what happens to people who stand up against Rome. They just trolled them. Then they made other ones that were even worse. Judea divicta. Judea has been conquered. So, again, this is brutal. This is brutal propaganda to remind the people, do not rebel against us, or this is what's going to happen to you. This was ancient Rome. They took what the Assyrians did and they just magnified it. By the way, the Assyrians used to crucify people. They would just take a stick and jab it up your backside, and then they would march into the next battle, the next town with these people on pikes. And the Romans said, that's not the best way to crucify. There's a better way to do it. And the Romans perfected crucifixion by sticking them in the ground. And so the Romans took a lot of the Assyrian battle tactics and perfected them. And that's the history of warfare. You read the history of warfare. What can I take? What was bad? What was good? And people have been perfecting that ever since. The Romans did that a lot.
Sorry, what is the face on that?
Yeah, who is that?
Oh, I'm sorry, Vespasian. So this face here is the Emperor Vespasian. So this is the emperor who is responsible for destroying the temple. This is Vespasian. He was the one who captured Flavius Josephus, right, the Roman Jewish historian. Yeah. And when he captured, who was a general, a rebel general for the Jewish army in the north. And he entered into a suicide pact, and surprise, surprise, he was the last one to get picked. And so they're going around, and he kills him, he kills him, he kills him, and Josephus is supposed to kill himself. And instead of killing himself, he opened the door and he went out to the Roman army, and they said, you're one of these rebels. And he goes, no, look what I did. And he goes, by the way, I'm not a general, I'm a prophet, and Vespasian, you're going to be the emperor. And Vespasian says, I like this guy, come with me. And he took him back to Rome, and he marched into Rome. And this was the year of the four emperors, 69, 70 AD. And Vespasian marched into Rome, and sure enough, he became the emperor. And so he looked on Josephus, and he said, you know, people from the East, they always had a reputation of being wise men, prophets. He goes, I want you to write a history of your people. But Josephus knew that he couldn't just write a history of his people that just said the Romans are horrible. He had to write a positive history, or at least one that was acceptable to the Romans. And so the histories that we have from Josephus, Antiquities of the Jews, War of the Jews, scholars are always reading them saying, how much of this is Josephus telling history, and how much of it is history? Believe this or not, when people write history, sometimes they slant it for a particular audience. How much of it is slanted so that Rome would accept it? So how much of this is MSNBC Josephus history, and how much of this is Fox News Josephus history, right? This has been going on for thousands of years. Now, after the Romans come and start to grow it up, they turn it into ultimately a Christian city. Constantine comes along, conquering this image, and it turns into a Christian city. And this is what we call the Byzantine period. So after it becomes a Christian city, then it starts to go into decline. Rome has overexpanded and it becomes a Christian city. So off in the Arabian Peninsula, we see the rise of Islam. And this is the Prophet Muhammad, and he's going to unite all of the pagan Arab tribes under a new religion called Islam, which, coincidentally, is an Abrahamic religion. It takes Judaism and it takes Christianity and says, that's all well and good and true, and we're the next iteration of that. And so he unites them with that religion, and then they start to expand. Strabo, in the 1st century BC, gives a description of where the Arabs live. And he says that they live on the Arabian Peninsula. So all of these Arabs are living down on the Arabian Peninsula, and that's where Mecca is, that's where Medina is. And then they begin to migrate to the north. Now the first ones to come up are pre-Islamic, the Nabateans, for instance, the guys who built Petra, the city carved out of stone, you know, where the Holy Grail, right, you know, if you watch Indiana Jones 3, it's not where it is, but that's where they stage it. That's a beautiful city. So they came up prior to Islam. You have some pagan Arab tribes coming up. They were eventually Hellenized, and so they just believed all the Greek religious things. But after that, once Muhammad converted all of the Arab world into Islam, they began to spread out, and they began to conquer. And they went to the east, and they went into old Persia, and they went to the north, and they went across northern Africa. And one of the first places they went to conquer and to colonize was Jerusalem, because that was the ancient city. That was the place where Abraham and all of the things that they read about in the Quran, that's where they were all from. And so one of the first places that the Arab peoples in the 7th century went to colonize was Jerusalem. And one of the first buildings they built was, they knew that the Jewish temple had been destroyed. We talked about this last week. So the Caliph Abdul Malik built the Dome of the Rock where the Jewish temple once stood. Again, it's not a mosque, it's a shrine to commemorate that place. In the Islamic tradition, it's not Isaac that's being sacrificed or nearly sacrificed, it's Ishmael. It's the other son, the one that Abraham kicked out. And the Arab peoples trace their heritage back to Abraham through Ishmael, whereas the Jewish people trace their heritage back to Abraham through Isaac. So they both refer to themselves as children of Abraham, and they say, both traditions say, that that rock on which Mount Moriah, where he was going to sacrifice him, is that rock on which he built that dome. So both traditions claim Jerusalem, specifically that sacred spot where the Dome of the Rock is, as one of the holiest sites in both religions. One's the Jewish temple, and now it's the Dome of the Rock. So Abdul Malik builds that, and of course that becomes the third holiest spot in all of Islam. And this isn't until the 7th century CE. And after that, after the 7th century, it largely, with the exception of the Crusades, it basically stays an Islamic city. It stays an Islamic area down until World War I. Now, while it's an Islamic empire, different caliphates start to fight within each other. So you have the Umayyads, who spread out, and then behind them you have the Abbasids, and then the Fatimids, and they're coming out. So this is why Northern Africa, you have Libya, Algeria, Tunisia, Morocco, right, Egypt. That's why they're all largely Islamic countries. Whereas then you have the Sahara and Sub-Sahara, you still have the Christian. A lot of these are Christian nations, because Christianity existed before Islam. They went down into Ethiopia, got down into the coast and went down, plus you have the Christian missionaries going down. So down there's a mix of Islam, but largely Christian nations. But the Islamic countries came, then they went up into Spain. This is where you have the Moors, right? So this is how the Moors got up into Spain. And for a while there, it took over basically most of Spain. And then, of course, they're going up into Turkey. This would become the Ottoman Empire. We'll talk about that in a second. And then they're pushing into Europe. And this is where we begin to get these clashes between the Eastern Christians, what would become the Orthodox, and the Ottoman Turks. And that battle is still going on today. Eastern Europe versus Islam coming across where Istanbul is. But Northern Africa is still largely Arab today. But that was all a part of that original conquest coming out of the Arabian Peninsula. First going into Jerusalem and then spreading both directions. At one point, Pope Urban, the rationale for the Crusades is argued by many scholars. I don't think it was just religious. I think it was economic largely. But he gave a famous speech calling for the Crusades to go back and take Jerusalem for the Christians. Excuse me. For all these going to there will be remission of sins if they come to the end of this fettered life while marching by land, crossing by sea, or fighting the pagans. This I grant to all who go through the power vested in me by God. Basically, if you, in whatever lot in life, if you will go fight against the Muslims and try to take back Jerusalem, I, Pope Urban II, grant you forgiveness of sins if in this conquest you die. So a lot of people who weren't the firstborn son, who weren't going to inherit their father's land, and who didn't want to go into the monastery, or who didn't want to, they were going to go into the military anyway. That's the only way you were going to, unless you wanted to go work for your older brother. They just went on a crusade, knowing that if they died, they'd go straight to heaven. So that's what prompted a lot of the crusades, was this. There was also this, you let those who have been long robbers, right? You're going to be a pillager, you're going to be someone. Now you can go be a soldier for Christ. You can go kill Muslims and take back Jerusalem. So the motivations for the Crusades have often been questioned, but they were successful for a period of time. And this is what takes us back to last week's lecture. They did take the old city. And when they set it up, they converted the Temple Mount into the Templars, the Knights Templars' quarters. So the Dome of the Rock became the Templum Domini. The Al-Aqsa Mosque became the Temple of Solomon, right? And remember I told you that facade in the southeast corner? That became what they called Solomon's Stables. They saw these big pillars holding up, and they said, well, this is where King Solomon must have kept his horses. No evidence, but that's what they called it. And then, of course, where Jesus was buried, that became the Patriarch's quarters. To this day, that's the Christian quarter. The Syrian quarter is now the Islamic quarter, and then they let the Armenians move in down here, and that is still the Armenian quarter to this day. But the quarters in the old city were largely set by the Crusades. Then Salah ad-Din comes in. He's Kurdish. He's a Kurdish Muslim, and he's establishing the Ayyubid dynasty. And he came in, and he conquered Jerusalem and basically took it back from the Crusaders. And he says, we're going to clean up the Haram, we're going to clean up the Temple Mount. And then he says, I'm a Muslim, but I'm going to give the Church of the Holy Sepulchre back to the Christians. It's your area, we're going to give it back to you. And we're going to allow the Jews to settle in Jerusalem. The Christians had driven them all out, and if they didn't leave, killed them. And he says, no, this has traditionally been your city. We're going to allow the Christians to come back in. We're going to allow the Jews to come back in. And they started settling in what is now the Jewish quarter. So Salah ad-Din has gone down in history as one of these nobleman warriors, because he was not only able to conquer the city, but he was then able to execute a power-sharing agreement where we're in control and you're going to pay us taxes. But we'll allow everyone to have their spot. You can worship as you want to worship. You can worship as you want to worship. And then they went through and they took out all the things that the Crusaders had put in and replaced them with Islamic shrines. And so this was basically the retaking of Crusader Jerusalem back for Islam, with the acknowledgement that there's a Jewish history there and that there's a Christian history there, and that they all need to be acknowledged. And I guess what I'm pointing out there is in the 13th century, in the 12th century, Salah ad-Din, after conquering the city, recognized, yeah, we can all do this together. We can all do this together. It's possible to do. In the meantime, so after he allows them, Judah Halevi is over in Spain, and the Spanish reconquest of Spain is going on. That is, they're kicking out the Muslims, they're having their Inquisition, which means not only are they driving out the Muslims, but they're driving out the Jews. And a lot of these Jews that are living, they're physicians, they're learned people, they're realizing we have to either fake convert to Christianity or we have to leave. And a lot of them, this is in the 12th century BC, 13th century, 15th century BC, including Maimonides, Moses Maimonides, who became one of the great medieval scholars, said, you know what, we ought to consider going back to our traditional homeland. We ought to consider going back to Palestine. And so he's saying Jerusalem is the center of the Jewish people. We should go back there. They don't want us here in Europe. So this isn't Hitler we're talking about. This is the 13th century. We need to consider start going back. And so I call this early Zionism. Early Zionism, there's a movement within the Jewish mentality, Europe-wide, saying let's go back to our ancestral homeland. Which brings us to the Ottomans. These Islamic dynasties, as caliphates, continue to, until the Ottomans come to power. And one of the great Ottoman rulers is Suleiman the Magnificent. He basically takes over all of the Near East. And the Ottoman Empire grows and grows and grows. He basically does as much work in Jerusalem as he does in Mecca. Jerusalem becomes the third most important city in all of Islam. He establishes a Sharia court, so the Quran becomes the law of the land in Jerusalem. Jewish refugees coming out of Europe are encouraged to settle in Jerusalem. He wants them to see Jerusalem, his new big city, as a place of refuge for all peoples. Just pay our taxes and do what we say. But this is a place for you. And you can see that the population in this is the 16th century. From 1553 was 13,000 people, including about 1,500, 1,600 Jewish individuals, and it tripled from 1,500 people. So now we're really starting to see an influx of individuals, not just Muslim people, but Jewish people coming in under Suleiman.
So what's going on with the indigenous Palestinians during all this?
The Turkish people, Ottoman people, are occupying Palestine. So there are Arab peoples that live there. There are Jewish people that live there. There are some Christian people that live in the old city that live there. And they're all living under the Ottomans who occupy the land. And that's how it is. And that's how it is for 400 years, up until World War I. Because you'll remember that the Ottomans were in power until they were defeated by the Allies in World War I. The Ottomans are not Arabs. So the Arab peoples that live there, the Jewish people that live there, the Christian people that live there, some of these Christians are Arab Christians, some of them are European Christians, Greek Orthodox that have moved there. They're all living there under this Ottoman city in Jerusalem. But you also see that, like David DeRossi says, here in Jerusalem, under the Ottomans, we are not in exile as in our own country. There are no special Jewish taxes. In a lot of the European cities, Jews had to pay special taxes just for being Jewish. But in Jerusalem, they didn't have to do that. So then we move into, you can see that we had Nachmanides, Maimonides, but the Spanish Inquisition, especially up into the 15th and 16th centuries, really started Zionism. They started going back. And then when we get into the 19th century, you really see this big movement prior to World War I there's a lot of anti-Semitism in Europe. There's a lot of anti-Semitism in Russia. And so they start moving back into this ancestral homeland, which kind of upsets the balance of the Arabs who had been living there under occupation by the Ottomans. And the reason I mention that is because if you've seen Lawrence of Arabia, you'll know that the movie Lawrence of Arabia is the British trying to convince the Arabs living under occupation by the Ottomans to rebel against the Ottomans and help the British defeat the Ottomans. The Arabs didn't like being occupied by the Ottomans, and so the whole point was to overthrow the Ottomans, and the British promised them, we'll give you an Arab state. We'll give you a state of your own, which is what takes us to this next and last. This is our last date here. After World War I, the British and the French divvied up, this is what they used to do. Other colonial powers, imperial powers, the British and the French, divvied up what they were going to do with the land. And the British said, we'll take everything in the south, and you guys, the French, take everything in the north. This is why when you go to Lebanon, in Syria, they all speak French. And when you go down to Egypt, the money down there is the Egyptian pound, because it's still the British influence. And so they set up what they call the French mandate for Palestine and the British mandate for Palestine, because they defeated the Ottomans, and the Ottomans retreated to their ancestral homeland of Turkey. So Turkey is now what's left of the Ottoman Empire, and now the British and the French are carving up the spoils of their war, which is ancient Palestine. So now the British and the French occupy Palestine, and they set up the British mandate. And you can see they mint money, Palestine, right? It also says Palestine, right, in Arabic. So the British start living up to their promises. So they went, all those people in Lawrence of Arabia, all these Arab leaders that helped them defeat the Ottomans, they started making kings of new countries, because the Brits have control. So they went to Faisal bin Hussein, and they said, you are now the king of the new nation of Syria. And the French said, we control Syria. We want Syria. And so they had a little disagreement. And so they said, this led to what we call the Franco-Syrian War. And they said, fine. We're going to make you the king of the new country of Iraq. And Faisal said, sweet, I'll take it. So the British went over here, and they created the new country of Iraq, because they controlled the land. And they said, Faisal, thank you for helping us overthrow the Ottomans. You are now the king of Iraq. We told you we were going to take some of our land and set up Arab states, nation of Iraq. And then, so they took that land. Then they went over to his uncle, and they said, where is his name? I have it up here. Oh, they went Abdullah the First, and they said, we're going to make you the emir of a new state that we're setting up called Transjordan, across the Jordan. And so they made Abdullah the First the emir of Jordan, and then they said, emir, Transjordan, we want it to be an independent nation, so they changed the name to Jordan. And so now he's the king of Jordan. So of this land that the British controlled, they've created Iraq and made Faisal the king. They've made it Abdullah. He's now the king of Jordan. So what's left? Just what we now today know as Palestine, this land here. And the British said, okay, we're going to take the 75% of the land we've already turned into Arab states. With the remainder, we want to make an Arab state in the south and a Jewish state in the north. And this was called the Peel Plan, the Peel Commission. And we're going to take a state up in the north, and this will be our two-state solution. Little Jewish state up in the north, the Galilee, and the Arab state down in the south. So the green part is the Arab state, the purple part is the Jewish state, and Jerusalem will be an international city. If this is God's holy city, then it belongs to God. No country claims it. They went to the UN and started talking about this, but in the meantime, World War II breaks out. And that's the Allies versus the Axis powers. And during this, you have the Holocaust. And when we discovered what Hitler was doing to the Jews, by the way, the Arab contingency in Jerusalem sat down and met with Hitler. I don't have them in this slide, but we have photos of the Mufti of Jerusalem sitting down and meeting with Hitler and trying to make an alliance, and here's what we want to do, and that didn't go over well. And then when the Axis powers lost, they recognized what Hitler had been doing to the Jews. There was a tremendous amount of sympathy for them, basically saying, we need to hurry up and set up this state. So there was now a huge push to reconcile this Israel-Palestine, this Arab state, Jewish state. And so with international support, the League of Nations, which is now becoming the United Nations, came back and they said, let's finish this creation of this state. And so the UN partition plan came up, and they said, we're going to split it up into a Jewish state and an Arab state. The UN approved it. The Zionists said, we accept. The Arab parties rejected it. And they rejected it because all of the Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Egypt told them, we do not want to live next to a Jewish state. So they rejected this in the UN. We don't want a state because we don't want to live next to a Jewish state. Here's the vote. So here's all the people who voted for it. Here's the people who voted against it. There's the people who abstained. And as soon as they rejected this, the British said, we are not going to stay in there and continue to occupy this. We're out. And so you have to imagine for a second, when the US pulled out of Iraq after the Gulf War, right? What happened the next day? Civil war broke out in Iraq, right? Shia, Sunni. So when the British pulled out, the next day, the Jordanians rolled their tanks in, and the Jewish armies, the Jewish military factions, rolled in, and they went to war. And this is the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, as the Israel calls it, the War of Independence. And so they went to battle, and when they were all done, they signed an armistice, and this was the result. What you can see here, Israel got more land than it was originally going to get. The Jordanians won the West Bank. So the Jordanians are now occupying the West Bank. Israel's occupying what is now Israel. The Egyptians occupy Gaza, and the Palestinians got nothing. The Arabs in the land got nothing. And that has been the state until the Six-Day War, when all of those surrounding countries tried once again to take Israel out. And Israel not only defended itself, it took land, and it took the West Bank. So the Jordanians ceded any authority in the West Bank. They went back to Jordan. Israel now occupies the West Bank and Gaza. Egypt gave up Gaza. Israel has since pulled out of Gaza. So they gave Gaza to Palestine. And now they just occupy the West Bank. And that's how it's been ever since. But that's how it got to be the way it is. Through those key dates throughout history, that's how it got to be the way it is. And I guess what I'm saying is it didn't just start with World War II. It goes back a little longer than that. There's a little more history involved than just that. But that's how it got to be that way. Any questions?
Only 1,000.
Yeah.
Well, it's exciting to have our intellect stimulated in a way that makes it come alive. So let's have questions, but we'll use the
Sure.
How come they were, when the Ottoman guy was there, everybody got on? What changed that dynamic, that when they had that vote at the UN, so many of them said they didn't want to live next to a Jewish state? Why did that change?
So one of the questions, that's a great question. That's such a good question that's the question that I ask on an essay question in my class. Like, what is this? And because that's the very question that scholars debate and write papers on. And there are economic factors, there are historical factors, religious factors. Where I am on this is it's the rise of nationalism. Somewhere in the late 1800s, the 1900s, nationalism became a fancy thing. Everybody wanted their own country. So the French had France, and the Germans didn't always have Germany. They had they called it by Prussia and various names, and Austro-Hungarian Empire, and then it became Germany. And Spain was always these various kingdoms, and it became Spain. And every nationalism became a thing. And so my battery may have died. I can talk louder. When nationalism became the trend, I can do that, sure. When nationalism became the trend, and peoples wanted a state of their own so they could have self-determination, that's what everybody wanted. And so you see the states getting smaller and smaller, and everybody wants independence from one another, which then prompts things like the Soviet Union. So, okay, if we have all these little states, but they can't really defend each other, it's very expensive to have, let's say, 99 counties. Some of these counties only have, 200 people in it. What happens if we consolidate counties? No, we will never give up the autonomy of our little county, right? This is our county. We have a history. There's a lot of pride involved in nationalism. And so once the Kingdom of Iraq becomes the nation of Iraq, once the Kingdom of Jordan's still a kingdom, the Arab peoples, once the Ottomans were destroyed, were saying, where's our state? And the British are saying, you can have a state. And they said, yes, but we want a state on our terms, not negotiated by a bunch of Europeans. And we certainly don't want it next to a Jewish state. And so, and Israelis were saying, this is going to be we want a state too, and we're happy to. And when they just said no, they said, okay, you either negotiate or we're going to fight, and they fought. And the result of that fight and of every subsequent fight since has been no state for the Palestinian Arab peoples.
And I was just going to say that I think that last point that you made about not dictated by Europeans, because if you go back to that slide about who's for and who's against, and this might even be a segue for next week as we consider inclusion in the LGBTQ community, the notion of, yes, I want this for these people over there.
Right.
You go do your thing over there, and I'm fine with it. But the notion of you're my neighbor,
right?
We're rubbing elbows, we're experiencing this together. I'm not as comfortable with that. Right? And so these are the folks that are the neighbors, and they're the yeah, we've got a large body of water between us, and you do you,
right? And
exist. Awesome, lovely.
That's right. This is what we call the NIMBY effect, right? The not in my backyard effect, right? So we're going to build a nuclear power plant because it's going to give us low cost. That's great. I'm all for it. Just don't put it right here, just east of us in Iowa. We want it. We just don't want it in our backyard. Yeah. And that's what you can see. These are the countries that are next, in the region, or the ones that really don't like the United States. Same over here. These are the ones that we talked into that opposed it ideologically, but we also give a lot of foreign aid to. So we said, yes.
These non-European, non-Jewish states, some of which are Arab, most of which, a lot maybe, are Islamic. How did they so callously ignore the Palestinian people? Just tough luck. How did that happen?
I think that when you boil everything down to sheer diplomacy and economic terms, you begin. We could ask the question: why do we help some countries when they have humanitarian issues, and not help other countries that are having humanitarian issues? When you look at it, a lot of the countries we help having humanitarian issues also have oil, right? Or also have gold, or also have some, whereas the other ones don't. When you look at it from and I'm not talking it as an ethicist, not that I don't have any ethics. I'm not talking as an ethicist. I'm talking as a looking at the facts, looking at the numbers. And if you just continue to just look at the facts and look at the numbers and look diplomatically at things, that's how a lot of these decisions are made. They're just like, we just got to look at the numbers, and you forget the empathy, you forget the human factor, you forget the humanity of people. That the Palestinian people have been sold out by every single group, including their own leaders, for hundreds of years. And they're just looking for someone to not sell them out. Yeah.
And looking at the slide, you have the eastern side and you have the western side. And I'm just wondering, strategically, looking at the history of everything that's happened, was it the trade route that made this like such a point of conflict forever and ever? Was that the reason?
Drop in just a second. So if you're coming down here on the King's Highway or on the Via Maris, you're coming here and then you're into Africa. If you're going north and you're coming and you're staying this direction on the coast, you're going into Europe. And then if you're headed that way, you're into Asia. This is the land bridge into 3 continents. In their minds, not just religiously, it is the center of the earth. And so how does Solomon get so rich, or how does Megiddo become the place where all major battles are fought? It's because there's a key pass right here. You can see the mountain range coming around. Whoever controls that area, this is in the highlands, whoever controls this pass controls the traffic to 3 continents. And so we could say it's about religion, it is about nationalism, it's about economics. That's what it's about. It's about trade, it's about economics, and a little bit of water. I showed you that you're the last generation to see the Dead Sea. Half of the Dead Sea is gone. And the lowest point is up here. So just as they continue to siphon off water, both in Israel, but also in the West Bank, to farm and for people, the less water goes down the Jordan into the Dead Sea. And this is just evaporating. And pretty soon they will run out of water. They're adding desalination plants down here, but at some point they're gonna have the same problems that they have in Saudi Arabia, and it'll just be desalination plants all along the coast down here, like they have here.
Robert, thanks for your. Thank you for having me.